My friends, I don't want to talk to you today as a Middle East analyst, but as a Syrian speaking directly to the American people. If you're an American watching this, I want you to hear this very clearly. I am Syrian. I don't hate you. I don't wish harm to your soldiers. But I do believe you are being lied to about why your troops were sent to my country and why they are still there. For 14 years, you were told a very simple story. Bashar al-Assad is a dictator. He woke up one day, crushed peaceful protests, and America, the reluctant sheriff, had to step in to defend human rights, to fight terrorism, to bring democracy. That's a fairy tale, right? The real story is very different. The Syrian war didn't begin in Damascus. It began in Washington and Tel Aviv. Back in 2011, there was a political decision to overthrow the Syrian government. This wasn't spontaneous. It didn't come from a hashtag. It came from years of planning in think tanks and war rooms. You might remember General Wesley Clark talking about the memo he saw at the Pentagon in 2001. 7 countries targeted in a few years: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Iran. Syria was on that list long before the protests. Under Obama, that plan got a code name, Operation Timber Sycamore. This was the CIA's regime change machine. Billions of dollars, weapons pipelines through Turkey and Jordan, training camp run with Gulf money, and the so-called rebels they were training, arming, and coordinating were not some Jeffersonian Democrats. They were overwhelmingly jihadists. Many of them are the same people who later fought under the banner of al-Nusra, ISIS, and eventually under the today's so-called al-Jolani regime. So when you hear civil war, you should translate it as a foreign engineered regime change war, where outside powers pour gasoline on every internal problem Syria had, and then, of course, blame the fire on the house itself. Now, let's fast forward to the part where your soldiers enter the story directly. US forces in Syria. You were told they went in to fight ISIS to keep you safe in New York, in Iowa, in Texas. You were told it was about protecting America. It wasn't. US forces were deployed in Syria for 4 very specific reasons. Number 1, to deny the former Syrian government or the Assad government access to its own oil fields east of the Euphrates. Those fields are Syria's main source of energy revenue. Without them, the government couldn't properly fund reconstruction, couldn't stabilize the currency, couldn't get back on its feet. So your military sat on that oil not because America needed the fuel, but because Washington needed leverage. No oil, no reconstruction, no independent Syrian policy. Number 2, to block the Syria-Jordan-Iraq corridor at Al-Tanf. Look at the map. Al-Tanf sits on the highway connecting Iraq to Damascus and beyond that connecting Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. If you block that crossroads with a US base, you are not defeating ISIS, you're choking trade. You are disrupting military logistics. You are protecting Israel's strategic depth and keeping Syria weak and isolated. Number 3, to occupy Syria's food basket. The areas under US military protection with their local partners, the SDF, are not just where the oil is, they are also where much of Syria's wheat and agriculture are. Control the wheat, control the bread. Control the bread, control the people. A former US official literally described that 1/3 of Syria as the economic powerhouse and said it should be used as leverage in the political process. Leverage. That's a polite word for economic strangulation, right? And number 4, to shape the outcome of a 14-year CIA-led regime change war in line with Washington's interests. Troops on the ground give you a veto. You decide what kind of political settlement is allowed and who gets a seat at the table, who gets frozen out, what borders and constitutions look like. This was never just about ISIS. ISIS was the sales pitch. Now, we arrive at today. The old Damascus government is gone, Syria is shattered, and in its place, we have a new power structure dominated by Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, former emir of al-Qaeda in Syria, formerly the head of Jabhat al-Nusra, now the tie-wearing so-called president in Damascus. You were told America was in Syria to fight men like him. In reality, for years, American policy armed and politically enabled the environment he grew up in. And now that he sits at the top, your troops are still there, not to overthrow him, but to manage his regime. That is the new mission. The mission now is to secure Syria's transition into a controlled client state under Jolani, while Washington, Ankara, Doha, Riyadh, and Tel Aviv carve out their own interests. How does that look in practice? Joint patrols between American soldiers and Jolani's security forces. Let's talk about one of those patrols, the recent attack in Palmyra, right? It just happened. 2 US soldiers and a civilian interpreter were killed. Immediately, the official line was, it was ISIS, a lone wolf. This has nothing to do with our partners on the ground. Really? Ask yourself a basic common sense question. How does a supposed ISIS lone gunman get close enough to a well-guarded joint compound of US troops and Jolani security forces to open fire and kill multiple Americans? Did he teleport? And if the attacker was killed on the spot, why did CENTCOM and the Jolani authorities refuse for days to publish his identity? Because then the cracks began to show. A pro-Jolani TV quietly reported that the attacker was a member of Jolani's own security forces already inside the meeting. The Syrian Interior Ministry spokesman tried to clean it up, and he said, yes, he was working in our security forces. Yes, we had flagged him as an extremist a few days earlier. No, we didn't arrest him. We were just about to fire him on Sunday, but by God's will, he carried out the attack on Saturday. This is the level of insult they throw at your intelligence. Later, more information surfaced suggesting the attacker wasn't some random low-level guard, but a trusted insider, often seen standing right behind Jolani, even shaking hands with US soldiers. Now put yourself in the shoes of that man. You spent years fighting under an al-Qaeda banner. You were told America is the great Satan. You believed you were waging a holy war to overthrow the apostate Assad regime and march on Jerusalem. Suddenly, your leader, Jolani, moves into the presidential palace, shaves his beard a little bit, puts on a suit, and tells you, we are now partners with the United States. We are doing joint patrols with American troops. Do you see the internal explosion building up inside these people? From their perspective, they didn't sacrifice half their lives to end up protecting American soldiers in the Syrian deserts. So when I say US troops are being used as human shields for a regime they were told was their enemy, I'm not defending the attacker. I'm telling you the insanity of putting Iowa National Guard soldiers side by side with disgruntled ex-Al-Qaeda men and calling it counterterrorism. Now let me say this as clearly as I can to American families. If your son, your daughter, your brother is serving in Syria, they are not defending the United States. They are, however, guarding oil fields and wheat that don't belong to them, holding strategic choke points to serve someone else's map, providing muscle while a former Al-Qaeda commander is normalized as a reformer and groomed as future monarch. And here is the final insult. After 14 years of selling you democracy promotion in Syria, Washington's own envoy now says, we shouldn't expect democracy there. What works best in this region is benevolent monarchy. In other words, we destroyed a republic, we helped empower jihadist factions, we turned the country into rubble, and now the grand idea is to build an Islamic monarchy around Jolani because it is easier to control one man than deal with elections and parliaments. So let me end with a question to every American watching. If you truly believe your army should defend your homeland, your borders, your people, what are your soldiers doing dying in the Syrian desert to secure an oil and wheat protectorate for a man who spent most of his life under Al-Qaeda banner? This isn't about loving or hating America. This is about telling you what your own government wants. Your flag is being used to give moral cover to a project that puts American soldiers at the service of empire, not at the service of the American nation.